No price talk and no Lambos. This is not another crypto podcast. Welcome to Ignition. I'm your host, Jillian, and each week we will be looking at the problems solved by blockchain. I'll be going deep with the people building the apps and communities which are changing the world around us.
Well, hello and welcome to the EOS Dublin Ignition podcast with me, Jillian. Now, today I have a very well-known man who is traveling the world. He's basically a global ambassador for blockchain. It's a pretty cool title. Hello, Marc Taverner. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Jillian. How are you?
I'm very good, very, very good. So, Marc, I was going through, we met actually in Oman. So I'm not telling lies when I say you're a global ambassador. You travel the world talking about blockchain. But tell me a little bit about your background. You're an Englishman and you went to Brunel University in the UK.
Yes, Jillian, I did go to Brunel University where I believe I learnt how to play football quite well and from vague memory drank a fair amount of British beer whilst also studying business studies.
And from there you went on and you were impressing me before we started recording this podcast. You went on to France to a business school, the ESC in France. So tell me what that stands for.
Yeah, the École Supérieure in Clermont-Ferrand, where I studied business studies as part of a dual study period between Brunel University and the École Supérieure. So a wonderful experience, seeing not only a different culture, though I'm half French myself, so it wasn't that alien to me, but certainly seeing the way in which French deliver business studies and how business studies certainly was a little more respected than perhaps it was in the UK and given more importance than in the UK. So that was quite interesting.
Yeah, not that I wouldn't have thought that. That's interesting that, so business studies is more revered in France.
It was more revered and was treated as more of a classical subject than perhaps in the UK, where it was viewed as something which was more open to entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. So you're fluent in French, lucky you. And then after that, you went out into the big bad world. So what type of roles were you finding? You had a business degree. What type of roles were you drawn to initially?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting story, actually, because I didn't go into what was a classical role to begin with. In fact, I was handed a copy of a newspaper at the time called it was the European, in which there was an advert asking for someone to apply to come and set up a fax modem distribution business. And one of my friends said, Mark, this is absolutely for you. You have to go and apply for this job. So I did. And I ended up being interviewed for about 4.5 hours at a Novotel down in Heathrow by the founder of this particular business. And the long story short, I set up the UK arm of a fax modem distribution company before the internet was very well known. That was my first job out of university, which I funded with debt off my credit card to take some office space. And I slept on a blow-up bed behind my desk, which I dutifully let down every morning so that the telesales staff that I'd hired couldn't see that I was sleeping in the office.
Oh my goodness. That's a classic story. I almost feel obliged to explain what a fax machine is to any listeners who who didn't grow up with fax machines.
Well, yeah, let them Google how slow a 9600 baud fax modem is.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's mad. So then when did you first come across blockchain then and emerging technologies? Was that a recent thing or was that from the very beginning?
No, it was relatively recent. It was, around about 2013 when I started paying a little bit of attention to Bitcoin. And that was what then brought my attention to blockchain. And at the time, I was pocket money investing in startups, having kind of semi-retired from corporate life. And I absolutely remember the first moment where I was introduced to Bitcoin. It was when a recruitment consultant called me up and uttered these famous words, at least famous to me now. And he said, "Hey, Mark, have you heard of Bitcoin?" And of course I had, and he had me on that first line. And that was when I was really introduced to the industry with an opportunity for a very large manufacturer of hardware who were looking to ramp up their business. And, from that moment, I was hooked.
Wow. And what is it that you like about blockchain? So is it the technology? You mentioned you came in with the Bitcoin, so you obviously have a bit of a trading eye. What is it that draws you to this industry and makes you a global ambassador? That's not people work in this industry, but they're not global ambassadors. So there's obviously something else that's really appealing to you.
Yeah, look, what's really appealing to me about this industry is that it has the opportunity to change so many things for the good. So if you think about trust and how little trust there is in this global world, whether you're looking at the relationship between governments and citizens, or whether you're looking at the relationship between customers and organizations, or individuals and entities who are amassing and controlling their data, there has been a real erosion of trust. And what blockchain at its heart allows to be reestablished is a form of trust which is mechanical, which can be tested, which allows parties to trust each other where they don't naturally able to trust each other. And I think that, at least personally to me, has huge appeal, because you can achieve so many good things with this ability to reinstill trust in relationships and prove that trust has a right to exist.
It's an interesting world we live in, because I think sometimes we feel disenfranchised, as you said, between governments and citizens, institutions. There's, since the crash in particular again in 2008, there's a lot of people worried, and there's polarization. And it's interesting to see that how technology, I think during the dot boom, I remember thinking, maybe entrepreneurs in technology will save the world. But they didn't really. I was a bit disappointed by that particular boom and crash afterwards. But I think this particular technology, as you were saying, it has a fundamental difference in the way people who actually operate. So it will change the world.
I certainly hold out, and this is me speaking from a personal perspective, I hold out great hope that this technology will have an opportunity to make positive changes. And to your point around, the dot-com boom, I was reading recently, I'll give a shout out to Shoshana Zuboff here for his great book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, which talks about how in that first tech boom, the personal data of individuals was hijacked without us knowing. And, I think that book really neatly calls out some of the themes and some of the challenges that this time around, with this particular focus on the evolution of technology around blockchain, we have a chance to readdress and try and put right. And if anyone's got, it's rather a large book, but if anyone wants something to take onto the beach reading this year, they could do far worse than reading The Age of Surveillance Capitalism.
That's interesting. You actually just summed up and expressed much more eloquently than I could that feeling that I had. So I remember during the dot-com, I was working in the middle of it, I was very involved with it, and I was so excited. And afterwards, I felt so empty, and then increasingly, obviously, the sharing economy is not the sharing economy. It's to take everyone's data and get rich out of their economy. So it's a bit different. But you didn't expect our data to be eaten up quite so easily, quite so commercially. So that is very interesting. So with the blockchain now, so you're not a techie, but you do have a very strong technical understanding of it, I understand.
Jillian, you're very kind, and I fear probably a little too kind. I'm not sure I have a very strong technical understanding, but I have an understanding of how the technology can be applied. And then I know a good number of very, very strong technologists who I can turn to seek guidance on, whether that application of the technology is commercially viable and whether it's realistic to achieve within what is an acceptable time frame. But the application of the technology is something which I understand very well, yes.
We were talking briefly before we started recording, and we just touched on this. This is a really very interesting area between the public and the private or the permissioned blockchains. Do you want to maybe talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, so this is an area that I've got some really strong personal views on. So blockchain is really to my personal opinion, can only really be true blockchains when they exist in a public environment. And what I mean by that is where the blockchain is open for anybody to participate in, for anybody to act as a node within, and therefore to increase the security level of the blockchain by having a very large number of participants, rendering the security and the distribution of that blockchain to such a high level of dispersion that it would become almost physically impossible to overtake that blockchain. Whereas a private permissioned blockchain exists only on those nodes which are granted access within those organizations who are allowed to participate within that blockchain. And therefore, from my personal perspective, I'm not sure that that really is a blockchain, because if you can control all of the organizations or subvert all of the organizations or convince them to work in a direction that you think is the right direction, and you therefore have control of the nodes, why should really anybody else trust that particular blockchain? And I really struggle with that concept of a private permission blockchain. But here's how you can reconcile that particular difference: is that particular difference between the two styles of blockchain is you can entirely run a private permission blockchain for a large organization that really for for PR reasons, perhaps, or lacks of understanding, wanted to start their journey using a private permission blockchain. So you could build that style of blockchain for them, and then using the ability to anchor that blockchain into a public blockchain like the Bitcoin blockchain, which cannot be subverted and is very hard to be overtaken, then you can create a form of audit trail which allows everybody to have trust in a private permissioned blockchain. So I'm not sure if I did a very good job of explaining the difference between the two, but from a personal opinion, I think public blockchains are strong, technically very, very valid, but private permission blockchains seem to be blockchains which are more palatable for large organizations to begin their journey into this technology to work with.
Is that what JP Morgan's doing with the JPM coin? Is that like a private permission? It's to settle all the back office settlements. Isn't that what they're doing there?
To a certain extent, yes. But I think their drivers are slightly different, and their knowledge of the finance industry is almost undisputed. So they have slightly different drivers towards wanting to see the success of the blockchain that they have created for the consortium of the banks that they're working with than perhaps the rest of the ecosystem does when we're talking about public blockchains and imagining how those public blockchains could, for example, bring clean water on using micropayments to an entire country in Africa or even an entire continent in Africa. And I think the two drivers are slightly different, and therefore the approaches to the use of the technology are very, very different.
That's very true. And again, it goes back to your earlier point, saying you like the fact that this technology can change the world, and the ability to put trust, technical trust in place, it's so clever because we don't have to have those middlemen. We have trust that's mathematically proven, which is lovely because you can't scam maths, which is so cool. So now, speaking of maths, just to finish up the last question to quickly ask you, Mark, we're now at the start of May. This podcast will probably run out in about a week's time, but Bitcoin, it went through the 6,000 mark. Do we think the crypto winter is over?
Who knows? Honest answer, who knows? But after being in this industry for some 4 years now, I have been through cycles where the price has gone from, say, 130 up to 250, up to 270, up to 400 US dollars, I'm talking, and then back down all the way to 120, and then up to 800, and then up to 1,000, and then eventually, famously, up to 19,000 and some, and then back down again. So my point is, there have been a number of rises and falls that I've personally experienced, and I don't think this one is any different. What's really interesting about what happens as the price rises and falls is it has a natural effect of flushing out some of the hype, of flushing out some of those businesses which maybe don't have really well thought through business models. So it's almost a process of natural selection in the world of cryptography that helps right the balance between maybe some of the bad actors versus some of those that are good. And so I think it's a healthy thing.
Well, that sounds very positive. And it is hard to explain to non-blockchain people that volatility is, it's there. It's not the whole FOMO to the moon and the Lambo stuff, whatever. So I think you did a very good job there. So thank you so much for your time. The Global Ambassador for Blockchain was a good title. Marc Taverner, you are very, very welcome. And we'll speak with you soon again on the EOS podcast.
Jillian, thank you so much for having me.